drone wars in the Gulf, powerful strikes between the United States and Iran. Ceasefire? It seems that Iran's downing of the American drone has reignited the Middle East, and we have concerns in Israel. Iran has restored and reopened most of its missile tunnels, and inside Iran, growing pressure following the resignation letter of Iran's president Masoud Pezeshkian. And in Lebanon, dramatic escalation. The IDF is preparing to strike in the Dahya district of Beirut. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are on Boots on the Ground, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening here in Israel and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Today is June 1st, and we give you everything that you need to know, because the United States Central Command announced that American fighter jets acted quickly against the Iranian threats in the Gulf area. And according to the statement, American forces destroyed the Iranian air defensive systems, a ground control station, and 2 suicide drones that were on their way to threaten vessels in regional waters. In simple words, the Americans identified that Iran is not only threatening, it's already activating military capabilities on the ground. And the moment that the threat moves closer to ships in the Strait of Hormuz area, the United States opened fire. And this morning, more unusual reports came from Iran. Around 9 a.m., the sound of fighter jets was heard over western, eastern, and northern Tehran. About 10 minutes later, 3 consecutive explosions were reported in the port city of Bandar Abbas. This is in southern Iran, one of the most important points on the coast of the Persian Gulf. All of this comes after reports over the weekend that the United States struck military sites inside Iran. Tehran rushed to respond, and the Revolutionary Guards claimed that they hit an American base that had been used for attacks against Iran. As of now, the United States military has not confirmed that an American base was actually hit, but in the Middle East, sometimes denial or silence is only the beginning of the story. And why did all of this begin? Because according to the Americans, the strikes against the Iranian targets on the coast of the Persian Gulf came after a series of aggressive actions by Iran, mainly the downing of an American MQ-1 drone, which according to Washington was flying in international airspace. In other words, while Washington and Tehran are still talking about an agreement, on the ground it looks like the ceasefire is beginning to fall apart. On one side, there are negotiations. On the other side, there are fighter jets in the air, explosions in ports, suicide drones, and American ships that are being attacked in the heart of one of the most sensitive maritime routes in the world. And here the story becomes even more dramatic. While the world is looking at the negotiation rooms, the United States military is quietly operating alternative shipping routes in the Strait of Hormuz. At night, secretly, under Iranian threat, the Americans are helping dozens of commercial ships pass through the Persian Gulf without being exposed to mines, drones, speedboats, or missiles from the Revolutionary Guards. According to reports, over the past 3 weeks, the United States Central Command has helped around 70 commercial ships enter and also leave the Gulf. This is not a show operation. There are no big statements here, no dramatic press conferences. This is quiet, dangerous, and precise military work in order to keep the most important energy route in the world open. But the Iranians are trying to show that they are still capable of responding. The Revolutionary Guards claim that they attacked a base used by the Americans for operations against Iran, but they did not publish its location. Shortly before that, Kuwait announced that its air defenses forces intercepted a large-scale hostile missile and drone attack on Monday, while sirens and echoes of explosions shook the country. And that already gives a clear hint about which area the Iranians were trying to target. So the picture we are getting in is this. On paper, there is still talks about an agreement, but in reality, in the Persian Gulf, an almost daily military campaign is taking place. in the air, at sea, around ports, around bases, and around the Strait of Hormuz. And that is exactly the danger. The ceasefire will not collapse in one big moment, but will slowly fall apart, strike by strike, until everyone realizes that the war has already returned. It is important to emphasize, contrary to fake news, reports coming from media outlets like BBC and CNN, the agreement with Iran includes clear clauses that are supposed to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Trump himself said clearly that the agreement also includes long and detailed details on other nuclear aspects, and noted that most of the agreement actually refers to the nuclear file. And at the same time, there is major concern here in Israel. Iran has restored and reopened most of its missile tunnels. This is during the fighting. Iran worked on digging out the entrances to the tunnels while taking great risks, as the United States and Israel frequently attacked the equipment used for this digging. This work allowed Tehran to continue firing missiles throughout the entire war. All of this is happening while the exchange of blows continues in the middle of the negotiations to end a war that has already lasted almost 3 months. The Revolutionary Guards claim that they attacked an American base in response to strikes carried out by the United States at the beginning of the week against the military facilities in Iran. And inside Iran, there is enormous economic pressure. We know this also from the dramatic warning issued by the regime's president. The president of Iran warns of collapse and defines the current crisis as the country's central woe. Millions of Iranian citizens have lost their jobs, and foreign currency reserves are expected to last for only 3 more months. In addition to all of this, the American blockade is worsening the energy shortage and leading to an unprecedented jump in the prices of basic food products. And it seems that the Revolutionary Guards in Iran are much more emotionally connected to the Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon than anybody thought. Iran responded for the first time to the IDF strike order in the Dakheh district. Hours after the Israeli directive to strike Hezbollah targets in the Dakheh district of Beirut, the Iranian foreign minister responded with another threat and said, "The United States and Israel bear full responsibility." While the IDF is pushing and crushing the terrorist organization, senior Iranian officials are showing concern and connecting the different areas. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Muhammad Bagher Ghalibaf, threatened in English on his X account against the background of IDF strikes in Lebanon. He wrote, "The maritime blockade and the escalation of war crimes in Lebanon by the murderous Zionist regime are clear proof of the United States' failure to uphold the ceasefire. Every choice has a price, and the bill is coming." The spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry added, "We emphasize once again that we see ourselves as allies. Any action that we can take to help Lebanon and to help the Lebanese resistance against the aggression and illegal attacks of the Zionist regime, we will not hesitate to take." Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered the IDF to strike terror targets in the Dakheh district of Beirut. The IDF emphasizes that the Air Force has not yet launched strikes in the skies over Beirut. So is there a green light for strikes? Look, the United States also announced that if Hezbollah continues firing, Beirut will pay a price. The American administration proposed a framework for reducing the escalation and demanded that Hezbollah stop all attacks on Israel. In return, Israel would avoid expanding the operation in Beirut. Washington is disappointed with the response of Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri and is warning. Look, the IDF intends to present a variety of targets for attack, divided into 3 centers of gravity from Hezbollah's perspective. The first is human targets, a long list of senior Hezbollah officials headed by the organization's leader, Naim Qassem, whom in the days before the ceasefire, Defense Minister Israel Katz repeatedly declared to be a target of elimination. Qasem was recently begun speaking with the great militancy against the direct talks between Israel and the Lebanese government. He even claimed that the organization intends to lead a move to renew the civil war and threatened the life of Lebanon's president or anyone who negotiates with Israel. And in Gaza, the IDF destroyed Hamas weapons warehouses inside the Gaza Strip. During the week, IDF forces and the Air Force struck 3 weapons warehouses in several locations in the Gaza Strip. These warehouses stored explosives, weapons, and also military equipment intended to harm the security forces and the citizens of Israel. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and about the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. So 1 second before we begin, I want to call on you to continue in spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Leave me a comment, let me know where you're watching us from and what you're praying for in this situation. And don't forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms to get the behind-the-scenes look of what it's like to live in Israel in this war. So our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, could it be that our biggest mistake is that we are still talking about an agreement with Iran when in reality there is no longer one single Iran that we can deal with and nobody can sign it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We've been following the news for months when it has to do with this war. And it really is confusing to try and understand what the Trump White House is trying to do. Are we just on track to additional conflict? Or is this a earnest, a real attempt to have some kind of substantial, meaningful, long-term deal? I'd say conversely, it's also unclear whether or not the Iranians are even in the mindset, the ability to sign such a deal. Let's look at what's been happening in recent days to really understand the complexity of the situation. Right now, in the Strait of Hormuz, on an almost daily basis, there are exchanges of fire between the Iranians and the Americans. The Iranians are trying to disrupt naval trade. They're trying to attack American ships that are protecting ships trying to travel through the Strait of Hormuz. This is according to several sources. And the American forces in the area, in response or preemptively, depends who you're asking, of course, attack Iranian targets. They attack targets at sea. They attack targets on land that are Iranian targets that were used to launch missiles against US vessels or otherwise. So are we in a ceasefire? Is this part of the negotiation? Or is something entirely different happening? And I think the last part is the true part. There's something else that's happening. We're fighting a war of extended attrition, a war of prolonged static status, and not a war in which there's a clear path to negotiation or a clear attempt or a real desire to end with a military strike one way or another. Let's break down the facts here. In reality, the majority of the damage that should have been done, that was needed to be done to Iranian military infrastructure, was already carried out. In reality, the blockade that the American forces are imposing on the Iranian regime is working effectively. But still, even though the blockade is working, and even though the majority of the military apparatus of the Iranian regime has been destroyed or broken, still, despite all of that, the Iranians continue to disrupt trade through the Strait of Hormuz. What seems to be happening behind the scenes, is a creeping attempt of the American forces to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz and slowly inch their way through an opening of that strait. And the Iranians, of course, in response, try to stop, to prohibit, to break those attempts. Now, in reality, there is no meaningful negotiation. Let's be honest here. The gaps between the American requests and the Iranian requests are as large today as they were in the opening moments of this war, if not larger. And in reality, there are no substantial connections or talks between both sides. The majority of the communication is happening in the Strait of Hormuz through missiles, through bullets, through rockets, and through ships that are traveling. That is the majority of the communication that is actually taking place. And I'm not being cynical. This is the reality on the ground. Let me summarize. Very little connection between the demands of the Iranians and the American forces in the Strait of Hormuz or in general. Very little flexibility on the side of the Iranian regime, or possibly ability on behalf of the Iranian regime to actually carry out any type of agreement with the United States. Again, I raise the question that we talk about on a daily basis, which is that it's very unlikely that Iran is actually able to make a decision right now because they don't have any centralized government that has enough power politically, militarily, in support of the people in different factions within the government to actually move forward with an agreement. That seems to be the reality. And given those facts, we're going to see more of this. Offers of a negotiation where the offers put on the table have very little connection between the American side and the Iranian side. Again, on the fundamentals, there's disagreement. On Hezbollah being part of the ceasefire, on when enriched uranium is given back or not, because even on that, there's not agreement. On the ballistic missile program, on the payment and use of proxies, and on the list goes. There's more that they disagree about than they do agree on. And aside from everything important in the agreement, there's great progress in the negotiation. That's my joke for today. Because in reality, things are not actually moving forward. And the majority of the communication, as I said, is done by exchanging fire in the Strait of Hormuz. Where does that lead us? Where does that leave us? Well, with one of two options. More of the same, days, weeks, possibly months of prolonged tension in the Strait of Hormuz, mosquito ships from the Iranian fleet that attack cargo ships and American ships, American strikes on Iranian targets against their mosquito fleets, against their land-based surface-to-sea launchers, nighttime attacks against targets within Iran that are related to these attacks, and of course, here and there, Iranian attacks that are carried out against US assets throughout the Gulf states in this region. And here and there, someone in Iran will say, this was a miscommunication, it was a rogue faction. Here or there, someone in the Iranian regime will say, we accept or we don't accept the terms presented by the Americans, but one way or another, we're not actually moving forward. It's just a stagnation carried out in the Strait of Hormuz. And meanwhile, and this is important to note, Israel and Hezbollah are still fighting at earnest. Israel and Hamas are still fighting. It's lower intensity than it was in past phases, but there is a substantial fight taking place. Israel is fighting against the true, valid, real threat of Hezbollah and is doing the same against Hamas. Where does that leave us? We're waiting for something to change. We're waiting for something to break. We're waiting for a change of narrative, a change of leadership, a change of ability on the Iranian side, or further strikes or further financial pressure on the American side to bring down the Iranian regime, or their resolve not to sign any term or type of long-term agreement. It's confusing, it's frustrating, but this is the reality here in the Middle East. It is a complex reality, a nuanced reality, one where the bad guys never really disappear. They just come back again and again and again with a different name, with a different guise, with different leadership. But the trouble stays with you until you fully deal with it or change the regime. That is the complex reality of where we live.
And Mate, is Trump basically trying to do something that the West has avoided for decades? Not only to stop the nuclear program, but also to break the entire Iranian model: nuclear, Hormuz, proxies, money, and the perception of victory.
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. But in reality, the war taking place in the Strait of Hormuz is not just Iran against the United States. On a military level, that is true. On a financial level, on a geopolitical level, the war is between Iran against their Gulf state neighbors and through them against the United States. Because more of this war is about finances. More of this war is about trade than it is about true military capability. We've said this time and time again. This war is not a question of who's a stronger army. Clearly, obviously, the American armed forces are stronger than those of the Iranian army, the Iranian regime. That hasn't been in a question since day one of this operation. The question is whether or not Iran can disrupt trade. And to do that, to disrupt the trade, they need the captains of the ships and the insurance underwriters and the owners of the shipping companies to think that it's not worth the risk of sailing through the Strait of Hormuz. They don't need to beat the American army. They don't need to bring to surrender any of the Gulf states. They just need the threat of terrorism, the threat of violence to be sufficient to prevent them from shipping. Because if you ask the Gulf states, if you ask Qatar, if you ask the UAE, if you ask Oman, this is a war against them as much as it is a war against the US. Iran is fighting against them. Iran is bleeding their economy. Iran is trying to hurt them substantially, considerably, over time to bring down their economies. And when we recognize that, you understand that this is a regional war fought through finances, not just through military perspective. The Strait of Hormuz may be closed both through Iranian ships and otherwise, but the big price is being paid not by the US, it's being paid by the Gulf states that Iran is preventing from traveling through. And of course, Iran that cannot export its oil to China and other countries. That's the reality on the ground. So yes, we're looking at a situation where Iran is trying to threaten other countries, but it's not thinking that it's going to beat the US. That was never on the table for them. They believe, they hope, they think that they can terrorize other countries sufficiently to prevent them from trying to sail. That's all they need to do. And so far, it's been working not bad at all for them. In fact, if you look at the rhetoric coming out of Qatar, out of the UAE, out of Saudi, well, they seem far more militant and far more willing to use their own armies against Iran than was previously believed, simply because this is not just a war against the US, but against the allies of the US or the enemies of Iran. That's a reality on the ground right now. Again, I want to remind you, the Americans have won this war on a military level, but this is asymmetrical warfare. It's not about who has a stronger army. It's who can put a chokehold on the economy, who can threaten, who can scare, who can jeopardize. And Iran, which is a terrorist breeding, terrorist creating, terrorism inspiring nation, they do terrorism beautifully. I'm sad to say that, but it has been working very well for them in the Strait of Hormuz. And until that equation is broken, their ability to deter, to interfere, to scare ships from traveling through the Strait of Hormuz, this war is not over. The Iranian regime will be broken on the day that they can no longer jeopardize travel through the Strait of Hormuz, or they can no longer use the IRGC or their proxies to fight, to scare, to jeopardize others who want to travel through that area. That is the simple reality that we're facing right now. And the US, again, it reigns supreme on a military level, but that's not enough for a slow tanker that's carrying millions of barrels of oil or piles and piles of containers to slowly trudge their way through the Strait of Hormuz, knowing full well that any drone, any rocket, any machine gun fire, any RPG fire against them from an Iranian Mosquito boat might be the end of that ship, might be the end of their insurance policy, might send their ship down to the bottom in flames. And that in itself is enough to scare away most ships that want to travel through. Here and there, we hear stories of those who can make it through, but across the board, the Iranians have been able, despite substantial American efforts, to almost slow down completely all travel through the Strait of Hormuz.
And Mati, are we approaching the moment when Israel will have to choose between an American agreement that calms the world and an independent action that prevents Iran and Hezbollah from rebuilding?
I'm not sure I agree with that statement. I don't think Hezbollah goes against the interest of Iran, and I don't think it's jeopardizing the situation. I mean, there's this give and take relationship over there where Hezbollah does the bidding, for the most part, of Iran, and they promote their agenda in the Middle East. Now, I want to remind everyone, the Iranian agenda, their methodology in using military force has been to work through proxies for decades now. They don't use direct military warfare. They don't use a navy in the traditional sense. They don't send a land army in the traditional sense of it. They use proxies. They use Hezbollah, they use Hamas, they use the Houthis in Yemen, they use other terrorist organizations and quote-unquote grassroots terrorism in Judea and Samaria to carry out their bidding. That's how they operate. So if you look at it from their perspective, Hezbollah pinning down, and pinning down, I mean drawing resources from the IDF, forcing Israel to fight in the northern sector, to use substantial resources, both in manpower and finances, to fight against Hezbollah, that is what the organization was created to do. That's not a problem for Iran. Iran wants to disrupt. Iran wants to cause pain. Iran is insistent on jeopardizing and hurting civilian targets. And the IDF have to carry out substantial strikes. The numbers are substantial. It was 150 strikes yesterday in the 24 hours that proceeded against Hezbollah targets throughout Lebanon. And this pace will continue for days now because the IDF is fighting a substantial war against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Now, Iran wants to preserve Hezbollah. That's where Israel taking substantial action in southern Lebanon goes against the agenda of Iran. But overall, as long as Hezbollah is not fully destroyed, the Iranians are willing to sacrifice some of those soldiers, but they don't want to lose the asset that is the Hezbollah terrorist threat. As long as they have that asset in hand, they will be able to continue using it as a threat against the people of Israel. Look, the Iranian doctrine has been the circle of fire, the ring of fire, surrounding Israel on every front with terrorism in Judea and Samaria, within the Gaza Strip through Hamas, within Lebanon, within Syria. That was their agenda. That was their attempt. They used the Houthis to do the same. And their firepower, you need to remember, only entered the game in this last war, last summer at least, not now. When you combine all of that knowledge, all of those facts, it becomes abundantly clear. What Iran is trying to do is to circle Israel with threats, with attacks against it. What Israel is doing in its northern border is taking away this playing piece, this piece of the puzzle of Iranian power, taking it out of the hands of the Ayatollah regime. That's what we're trying to do. Hezbollah is a foreign entity, is a foreign power that is causing threat, that is causing damage in Lebanon. They are counter to the people of Lebanon. They're not an internal force. They're not doing this on behalf of the Lebanese people. They are doing this on the behalf of the bidding of their Iranian overlords. Now, they do have some independence, but ultimately they're funded, they're trained, they're equipped by the Iranians. And they're doing this to be part of the Iranian foreign policy doctrine, which is to use proxies to weaken Israel and allies of the United States. Now, it is possible, and this is sort of where we go to the next step. If Israel, and I hope this happens, is successful in dramatically breaking away the ability, the power of Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's good for Israel in its northern border, but it also weakens the Iranians' bargaining posture against the United States by eliminating a major proxy that they've built up in this region. And if that happens, it makes the situation worse for Iran as it negotiates with the United States. But that's two steps forward. In the short term, in today's reality, Iran wants Hezbollah to keep firing on Israel. It wants Hezbollah to be occupying Israeli soldiers. It wants Hezbollah to threaten the civilians of Israel. That's what they were created for. They were created for the purpose of terrorism against Israeli targets. Let's not be confused about why these people exist in the world. It's not for the benefit of Lebanon. It's for the detriment, for the suffering of the people of Israel. And therefore, Israel will continue fighting Hezbollah and harming Hezbollah until that threat no longer exists, until it's removed from the tool belt of the Ayatollah regime in Iran.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani. That definitely helped us understand better what we're dealing with here in this situation. And to all of you, we are TBN Israel. We are reporting twice a day since this war began about what's happening in Israel, about the war, and about how you can pray for the situation. So, best thing to help us is to hit the subscribe button, look for Yair Pinto, Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms, and understand that many Israelis are still juggling reserve duty while trying to get back to work and handle their day-to-day lives. It's not easy. Your body is tired, your mind is overloaded, and the pressure doesn't stop when the uniform comes off. I've been there, coming home from reserves, trying to be present for my family, catching up at work, while still feeling like I'm in a survival mode. It takes strength, energy, and faith to push through. So that's why I started using Vinia. It's an Israeli supplement made from red grape cells that help improve the blood flow to your heart, your brain, and your muscles. For me, that meant better focus, more energy, and fewer days of that foggy, burnt out feeling. So I started using it during my reserve duty, and I'm still using it today. There's also a coffee version, a tea version, and you can try it for yourself, but I recommend highly because it works. Go to Vinia, tbnisrael.com. Again, that's Vinia, tbnisrael.com, or call 800-638-1944. That's 800-638-1944. So try it for yourself. And while outside they are talking about an agreement, underground in Iran, bulldozers are moving. They are working. Satellite images indicate that Iran has reopened most of the missile tunnel entrances that were damaged in American and also Israeli strikes. 50 out of 69 tunnel entrances across 18 underground missile facilities have already been dug out again or restored. And this is the question that should worry Israel now. If the war renews tomorrow, how quickly will Iran be able to resume firing missiles towards Israel and towards the Middle East? Because the story here is not just another strike. It's not another response or another threat. The story is the speed of Iran's recovery. During the fighting, the United States and Israel tried to hit one of the most important capabilities of the Islamic Republic, the underground missile network. Not only the missiles themselves, also the roads leading to them, also the tunnel entrances, also the equipment meant to allow launchers to come out, fire, and disappear back into the mountain. But now it turns out that the Iranians worked fast. They used simple equipment, bulldozers, trucks, earthwork, without especially sophisticated technology, without magic, just manpower, time, and very high risk. For weeks, even under the attack, they cleared blockages and dug the entrances to the tunnels again. This teaches us something important. It is very difficult to destroy Iran's missile array only by blocking tunnel entrances. You can delay it. You can hurt the pace. You can cause damage. But if the stockpile itself remains deep underground, and if the launchers still exist, Iran can return to firing. According to expert assessments, Iran still has many hundreds of missiles that are stored in underground sites. Some assessments speak of about 1,000 missiles that are still in stock. Even if production was damaged, even if the supply chain was hit, an existing stockpile can be enough for additional, very difficult rounds. And that's exactly what worries Israel, because while Trump is talking about an agreement, Iran is preparing its ability to continue the war. While markets in Tehran get excited over every rumor of a breakthrough, the Revolutionary Guards are bringing launch infrastructure back into operation. And while diplomats talk about uranium, Hormuz, and sanctions, the Iranian military is preparing itself for the next stage. This is also why the exchange of fire in the Gulf does not stand alone. United States Central Command announced that the American strikes over the weekend targeted radar sites, air defensive systems, a ground control station, and the command control site of the Iranian UAV network. The targets were in the area of Giruk and on Kesham Island, very close to the most sensitive maritime arena in the region. The American action came after the downing of an American MQ-1 drone, which Washington says was operating over international waters. Iran claimed that the aircraft entered its airspace. The Americans did not accept that claim and acted inside Iran. And during the operation, 2 suicide drones were also destroyed. They were defined as a clear threat to ships in regional waters. No American soldier was hurt in this operation. That's important. But the Revolutionary Guards did not stay quiet. They announced that they attacked the airbase from which, according to them, the American strike against the communication facility in the Sirik area in Hormuzgan province had been launched. Shortly afterward, Kuwait announced that its air defensive systems had dealt with hostile missiles and drone attacks. Sirens were heard and explosions were felt in a country where significant American forces are stationed. Kuwait did not say who attacked it. Iran did try to send a message. The message is that every American base in the Gulf region is inside the circle. Not only ships, not only aircrafts, also bases, ports, communications, facilities, and logistical centers. And that makes the agreement with Iran much more complicated. On paper, the sides are still talking. In practice, they're shooting. The Americans are striking inside Iran. The Iranians are claiming to have attacked the base used by the United States. Kuwait is intercepting threats in the sky. In the Strait of Hormuz, commercial ships are still moving under threat. And at the same time, Iran is restoring its missile tunnels. This does not look like the end of the war. It looks like a ceasefire being held together by force, with cracks widening every hour. Here the economic pressure comes in. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian warned that the country's central war is in the economic arena. He said that Iran is struggling to export oil, collect taxes, and provide answers to the distress of the local businesses. Behind those words is a very harsh reality. More than 1 million citizens have lost their jobs in recent weeks. There are assessments speaking of close to 2 million unemployed. Tehran's available foreign currency and its reserves may last only for 3 months of imports at the normal pace. The local currency has weakened, and prices are rising quickly. There are basic products that have already become symbols of the economic fear, like rice, meat, bread, cheese. In Tehran, people spoke about Lahvan cheese that rose within months from hundreds of thousands of tomans, the Iranian currency, to almost double the price. For ordinary families, this is not economic figure. This is a more empty refrigerator. The maritime blockade is worsening the situation. Crude oil is stuck in storage facilities. Exports are hurt. Storage sites are filling up. And if oil wells are shut down for a long time, the damage to Iran's oil infrastructure could be deep and difficult to repair. And at the same time, official figures in Iran are calling on the public to reduce consumption of fuel, water, and electricity. This is the real background of the negotiations. Iran is not sitting at the table from a place of comfort. It is sitting at the table because its economy is being choked, but the Revolutionary Guards do not want to appear as those who surrendered. That's why they are operating on 2 tracks at the same time, talking about an agreement and rebuilding military capability. Trump also understands this. That's why he emphasizes that the agreement with Iran must include clear clauses that prevent it from having a nuclear weapon. He insists that the nuclear issue is not a side detail, but the center of the agreement. He wants to know what happens to the enriched uranium, how it leaves Iran, who receives it, and when it happens. This is one of the hardest points in the talks. The issue of transferring the enriched uranium is not only technical. If the material remains in Iran, even under supervision, Israel will have a hard time seeing that as a real achievement. If that material leaves Iran, Trump will be able to present the American public with a clear achievement. But for the Revolutionary Guards, removing the material could look like a strategic humiliation. There is also the money issue. Senior Iranian representatives traveled to Doha, Qatar, in an effort to gain access to billions of dollars in frozen assets. For Tehran, this is oxygen. For Trump, this is a political minefield. He had already attacked past agreements that were seen as releasing money to Iran without real compensation. Now he does not want to look like he's doing the exactly same thing. And at the same time, inside Iran, the leadership looks much less stable than the regime wants to project. The report about Pezeshkian's resignation letter exposed the depth of the rift. And according to the reports, the president claimed that the state management systems had left the official tracks and that the centers of power had effectively moved into the hands of a faction within the Revolutionary Guards. The regime denied it quickly and sharply. It claimed these were lies meant to divide Iran and serve the Mossad and the CIA. But the very sharp denial itself shows pressure. Pezeshkian himself published an unusual message about shared pain, hardship, and the need to present the public with reality as it is. He did not explicitly write that he was resigning, but the timing was charged enough for every word to sound like a signal from inside a shaking system. Mustafa Khamenei also sent an unusual message to the parliament. He warned against divisions, polarization, and carrying disputes into the streets. When a supreme leader speaks so much about unity, it's usually a sign that something at the top fears that it's not a guaranteed thing. Khamenei has barely been seen in public since he entered this role. He makes with written messages, sends and receives messages, no public appearances, and there are conflicting reports about his condition and his location. The regime is trying to project control, but behind the scenes, there are power struggles between the consistency, between the presidency, between the Revolutionary Guards, between the parliament, between the negotiating teams, all of them are not aligned and not united. And this is exactly where the Iranian market is reacting strangely. On one hand, there are signs of optimism. Property owners in Tehran are removing sale listings out of an assessment that if an agreement gets closer, prices will rise. The Tehran exchange stock market is reaching and is reacting to rumors and goes up. The dollar is weakening slightly. Gold is falling from heights. Private money is beginning to move back into the stocks. On the other hand, this is not a recovery. This is hope. It is hope that can reverse very quickly if it turns out that the agreement is delayed, that the strikes continue, or that Iran refuses Trump's demands. In Iran, the real estate market, the dollar, the gold, are not only economics. They are a fear index. When the public fears war, it runs to assets. When it smells an agreement, it tries to grab a place before prices change. Even the reopening of the internet after 88 days is seen in Tehran as more than a technical step. Some see it as an attempt to calm the public. Some see it as a signal that the regime is preparing for a less confrontational pace. But here too, caution is needed. Opening the internet does not erase a crisis. It only allows the public to speak about a little louder, to share what's going on. In 1 second before we continue, I want to ask you to help us spread the truth. Share this report, click the like button, most importantly, subscribe to TBN Israel so that you'll see boots on the ground every time we report and know how to pray for the situation. And now, only after we understand Iran from within, we need to move to Lebanon, because Lebanon has become a key in the negotiations between Washington and Tehran. Iran demands that the Lebanese front be part of any future agreement, not as an appendix, a condition. From Tehran's perspective, if the United States wants quiet in the Gulf, an opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and progress on the nuclear issue, it also has to stop Israel in Lebanon. Israel sees this completely differently. From Jerusalem's perspective, Hezbollah is violating the ceasefire again and again. The fire towards the north continues. Sirens were heard in Kiryat Shmona, Metula, Tzfat, Tiberias, Margaliot, Manara, and additional communities in the Galilee. In some places, these were sirens that had not been heard since the beginning of the ceasefire. In one morning alone, more than 5 launches crossed from Lebanon towards Israel, and the Air Force intercepted rockets and a suspicious aerial target. The hardest incident came at night. Staff Sergeant Adam Tsarfati, a fighter in the Maglan unit, fell in southern Lebanon from the impact of an explosive drone. 3 other fighters were wounded, one of them seriously. The incident took place while a Maglan special unit of the IDF was operating under the Golani combat team. And according to the assessments in Israel, Hezbollah is operating advanced drones, some with night vision capabilities, and in some cases also drones operated through fiber optics. That makes ordinary electronic disruption very difficult. And this is no longer a point harassment. This is a method of warfare. Hezbollah is trying to hit IDF forces inside southern Lebanon without exposing large launch arrays. It wants to wear down, hurt, and signal that it is still able to conduct a war even after damage to its infrastructure. In response, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered the IDF to strike terror targets in the Dahya district of Beirut. The order was given following repeated violations of the ceasefire by Hezbollah and attacks against the Israeli communities. The IDF is examining 3 centers of gravity for attack. The first is the human targets, senior Hezbollah figures headed by Naim Qassem. Qassem has recently returned to speaking in a militant line against direct talks between Israel and the Lebanese government, and even threatened anyone who conducts negotiations with Israel. The second center is the headquarters, communication rooms, command centers. The IDF understands that some of the instructions come from the centers of the Dahya area and the Bekaa Valley. Move to forward headquarters in Tyre and also in Sidon, and from there, becomes fire, becomes drones, and attacks against the IDF forces and the communities in the north. The third center is the weapons warehouses, operational apartments, drone warehouses, and technological arrays. These are the places where Hezbollah holds the ability to continue the war without officially declaring it. At the same time, residents in Beirut began leaving the Dahya area. There were reports of traffic jams on the way out of the district and GPS disruptions in different areas of Lebanon. In northern Israel, Northern Command instructed soldiers to move north of Akko with body armor and with helmets, even in civilian vehicles, and to reduce non-essential movement during daylight hours. This is a small detail, but it tells the whole story. When soldiers inside Israeli territory need to drive with a helmet and body armor because of fire from Lebanon, the ceasefire is no longer operating like a ceasefire. It is operating like a war under another name. The United States is trying to stop the escalation. Washington passed a clear message. Hezbollah must first stop all attacks on Israel, and in return, Israel will avoid expanding the operation in Beirut. The American administration is disappointed with the Lebanese response, and especially with the position of Nabih Be'eri, who tried to guarantee Hezbollah's commitment to a ceasefire, but demanded that Israel stop first. From the Americans' perspective, that's not a sufficient answer. The administration understands that Hezbollah operates according to Tehran's instructions. It also understands that Iran wants to use Lebanon as a central card in the negotiations. If Hezbollah continues firing, Iran can say that the region is still burning. If Israel strikes in Beirut, Iran can say that Washington does not control its ally. That's how Lebanon becomes an obstacle in the agreement with Iran. Not because Lebanon is the only issue, but because it connects everything. Hezbollah, the Revolutionary Guards, Israel, Trump, and the struggle over the image of victory. Iran wants to say that without Lebanon, there is no agreement. Israel wants to say without security in the north, there is no agreement. Trump wants to say without an Iranian nuclear weapon and without a regional war, there is victory. But on the ground, each one of those sentences crashes into fire, drones, tunnels, money, and politics. And that brings us back to the opening point. Iran is restoring itself while people are talking to it. It is reopening its missile tunnels. It is trying to bring the economy back to breathing. It is using Lebanon to pressure the United States. It is activating Hezbollah to preserve a regional card. And it's trying to present the Iranian public with an image of steadfastness, even when from the inside, sounds of cracks are being heard. Israel looks at this and sees a different danger. If the agreement arrives, if it arrives too quickly, it could stop the pressure before Iran and Hezbollah have really been weakened. If there's no agreement, the world could renew again against Iran, Hezbollah, and maybe other arenas as well. And between those two possibilities, the IDF is trying to use every day to hit infrastructure, push Hezbollah back, and restore the security to the north. The coming day will show whether Iran is truly on the way to an agreement or only using words to buy time to rebuild its missiles, build its economy, and build its regional axis of terror proxies. And if Tehran is already bringing its missile tunnels back to life while the world is talking about peace, who will stop it before the next launch arrives? Let me know what you think about this in the comments. In the meantime, keep spreading the truth, follow us, and most importantly, do not forget to click the subscribe button so you never miss another update of Boots on the Ground on our YouTube channel, TBN Israel, where we report multiple times a day. You can also look for Yair Pinto, Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms to see life in Israel through our eyes. And now let's pray together for the situation. I would say that the most important prayer point, and this is a new one for you, is to pray for the IDF soldiers, those that got injured in this war, in these 3 years of war. Nobody's talking about them. We have around 15,000 or more than that IDF soldiers that got injured from various levels of injuries, from losing an arm, a leg, an eye, or a body part, to being affected with post-traumatic stress to various levels. This is a big issue. And we need to pray for them to be able to heal, to rebuild, and to get back to their normal lives that is ahead of them. Let's pray for the family unit in Israel that won't be affected by the fact that a man or a woman need to fight for so long. It affects the whole family unit, not just the soldiers. And let's keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.